The next thing I'm going to do to prepare my data is check for null values. This way I can eliminate any null or unnecessary values from the data before I start combining it. To do this, I'm going to use the null functions. The null functions are a good function to use when you need to split off any null values. isNull looks for null values in the data. isNotNull looks for values that are not null. To remove the nulls, I'm going to add a split node to the agreements data. Let's take a look at the input pin. For this node, I'm going to split off all invoice numbers that are not null. This way, I am only working with those records with invoice numbers. So let's enter my script. I use the isNotNull function so that all records with invoice numbers appear within the true or first pin. Now I name and run the node. If I look at the BRD viewer, I see all records that have an invoice number. When using the split node, sometimes you produce two output pins, but only end up using one pin for the rest of your analysis. To help optimize the graph, you can use a where statement inside of a filter node to produce all records that match your specified parameters, similar to the first pin in the split node. Let me demonstrate. I'm going to add a filter node to the customer accounts data. I only want to work with those accounts that are not business accounts, and the filter node will allow me to output those non-business account records. I'm going to tell the filter node to omit all data where the business account is equal to N. This ensures only those non-business accounts get outputted. Now I name and run the node. If I look at the BRD viewer, I see only non-business accounts. This is as if I was looking at the first or true pin of the split node. Before I close the window, I want to point out the double equal in my where statement. This is called a comparison operator. An operator is a symbol that represents a specific action. For example, a plus sign is an operator that represents addition. The general syntax for comparison operators is expression 1, operator, expression 2. There are several comparison operators you can use. First, let's take a look at the double equal versus a single equal. I've got two examples I've used thus far for double equals and single equals. A double equal is used when comparing two expressions. In this case, the business account field to the text N. A single equal declares a new object and associates a name to it. For example, the variable we previously used. The single equals declare the new object of customer account number double long and associated the name underscore account to it. Along with comparison operators, you have logical operators, such as not, which evaluates to the logical not of the parameter, or, which evaluates to the logical or of the parameter, and, which evaluates to the logical and of the parameters. I am near the end of my data preparation phase. To finish preparing my data, there are a few more tasks I want to perform. First, I'm going to change some data using conditional statements. Let's take a look at the agreements data. The contract length in the agreements data should be in months. This means all the records where the contract length is 1 year should be changed to 12 months. To change this data, I will use an if-then-else statement inside a filter node. First, using the variable contract months, I state that if the value in the contract length field equals 1, then change the value to 12. Otherwise, leave the value as is. And this is a conditional statement. Now, here's what the conditional statement does. A conditional statement is a statement that directs the node to perform an action only if a specific condition is met. The if-then-else statement I used is the most common conditional statement. Notice the comparison operators. In this script, I use two comparison operators. The double equals, which is used to compare the expressions, in this case, contract length to the number 1, and the single equal, which is used to declare the if-then-else statement and associate a name to it. In this case, contract. To continue my configuration, what do I need to do with the variable? Correct. I need to output it. I will output the variable contract months as contract length. Now I name my node and run it. If I look at the BRD viewer, I see that my conditional statement has changed the value of 1 to 12, as I had indicated it to do. Now I'm going to join a data analyzer node to the account payments data. This way, all the other fields that I haven't already worked on can get converted to their appropriate data types. Next, I'm going to trim the leading and trailing white spaces from my data. Sometimes data may come in with white spaces. You may want to make sure to remove these white spaces before you combine the data. Otherwise, LAE won't recognize matches where there should be. There are two ways to trim white spaces. The Trim Fields node, which trims the white spaces for all records in all fields. The trim function, which trims the white spaces for all records in a specified field. The Trim Fields node automatically removes leading and trailing whitespace characters without any further configuration. I simply run the node. Before I move to the trim function, let's take a look inside this node. What I want to point out is the ability to trim specific characters from the data. For example, let's say invoice number comes in with an N before the numbers. N 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can use this node to trim the N from the data and only leave the numbers. Simply enter the character to trim, indicate whether the character is on the left or the right side of the word, whether to include or exclude the field in the white space trim, and most importantly, and which field to trim the characters from. The character trim can be applied to a single field or multiple fields. Now, let's talk about the trim function. The trim function does exactly what the Trim Fields node does. However, by using the function, you can specify what fields you want to trim instead of trimming the whole data source. For example, invoice number.trim parenthesis only trims the invoice number field and leaves the rest of the fields as is. I'm going to add a Trim Fields node to the rest of my data and then run them. I have finished preparing the data for my graph.